stay tuned because for the next 60 minutes, Motorsports Unlimited is on the air. Hi, I'm Jerry Bryant, and these are the lovely ladies of motorsports. And all this hour, we're going to have 60 minutes of action-packed excitement. All kinds of exciting things will happen. And we got the famous Bill Wildt, and we got all
Hi,
kinds
everybody.
of other good
Allow
stuff
me to
and
interrupt
happen
for a
all
moment.
this hour.
I'm Patty Warwitz,
Motorsports
and this is the
Unlimited, 60 minutes of
1242nd edition
action. So let's
of
go to the studio
Motorsports
right now.
Unlimited. Today we're turning back the calendar nearly 10 years to bring you one of our best technical shows created to help you understand rebuilding automatic transmissions. This is one of our better pieces of work because we found exactly the right people to explain. You'll meet Ray and Craig in a moment, but first Samantha will start things off.
Over the years, Motorsports Unlimited has explained many aspects of how automobiles are designed and built, from engines to suspensions. We have detailed what the engineers were trying to accomplish. One part we haven't touched on is the automatic transmission. They are so complicated, it is extremely difficult to find people that both intimately understand them and, just as important for our purpose, able to explain. After years of looking, we finally found the right folks. Let's join Bill on the far south side of Chicago and meet them.
Over the years, I have known many incredibly good mechanics. A couple of names that come to mind are Bruce Bober, Chris DeSalvo, and many others. Mechanics that have spent their life doing mechanical work and repairs of all kinds on automobiles, including complete engine rebuilding and all the rest of it. As a matter of fact, I myself like to consider myself a pretty good, pretty fair mechanic. And in all those years, I have never tackled an automatic transmission, nor has Bruce Bober, nor has Chris DeSalvo, nor has any of the other incredibly good mechanics that I know of. And I hope the opening shot gave you a little bit of an idea why automatic transmissions are incredibly complicated, and in my opinion, are kind of the way the auto industry has gone since my teenage days. In my teenage days, back in the mid-50s, mid-50s to late 50s, already you started to see some specializations. You started to see some shops that were ignition and carburation shops rather than complete general repair shops. As time went by, maybe into the early 60s, you saw the development of Midas and companies like that that kind of specialized in brake systems. And what I'm getting at is the cars were becoming more and more complicated and actually required specialists in each area. As time has gone by, of course, the automatic transmission has really bewildered most people, and there are a couple of reasons why the average guy doesn't go into the automatic transmission. Number one is it takes a lot of special knowledge that's only applicable to automatic transmissions, and number two, a lot of special tools. It takes a lot of special tools to take apart and put together an automatic transmission. So there's the knowledge base that's necessary and also the tools that are necessary. Long story short, I don't know of anyone, regardless of how gifted they are, that takes on automatic transmissions. But it's even worse than that. These guys, like my friend Bruce and Chris DeSalvo, at some point have gotten so fed up with dealing with automatic, they won't even take automatic. It used to be they would take automatic transmission work into the shop, pull the trans, take it to an automatic trans shop, get it back and put it back in. They were so frustrated with the results of that they won't even take in automatic transmission work. I've been doing Motorsports Unlimited now for 16 years. And
Please
in 16
remember,
years,
this show was
been
originally
looking for
taped nearly
someone
10 years
that could
ago.
properly explain automatic transmissions and show how they're put together and how they're built, and I finally found it. Now, to be sure, the reason I found it was because, quite frankly, I blew the transmission on my Ford van. And I was rather upset about it, even though I had 200,000 miles on the unit. And the guys tell me that, Bill, you know, 200,000 miles, what do you expect? Well, I sort of expect it to last forever. And, of course, they don't do that. My first thought when I blew the trans, and this was on the way home, by the way, from Thanksgiving morning at the Rock, my first thought on the automatic transmission was to call my friends at ABC Auto Parts and get a used transmission put in. Turns out my vehicle is not a great candidate for a used transmission because it's too old. They don't really save transmissions that are, my car is a 91, my van is a 91, and they don't really keep those kinds of cars that are that old on the shelf. And the reason for it is to find a 91 vehicle with very low miles on it is very difficult. So it's not something you can really, it's not a good candidate for a used transmission. Maybe if they had time to look for it and over a few months they could find a low mileage 91 Ford van. It's not really a good candidate for it. So second problem is, we're back to this automatic transmission thing. Even my very good friends and very gifted and skilled mechanics won't go near an automatic transmission, and they don't know anybody that they would recommend to go to take an automatic to. Well, guess what? Talk to my friends, Paul Bushman in particular at ABC Auto Parts, says we got just the guy for you. We are right now at 123rd and Halstead, 123rd and Halstead?
12307.
Okay, we're at 123rd and Halstead, and this surprised me. This is an AAMCO shop, and I would have thought the AAMCO thing worked entirely different. We'll talk about that a little bit more a little later on in the program, but I would have thought that the AAMCO thing worked a lot different than it does. I talk about it right now. I would have thought, because it's such a huge transmission change, I would have thought that all of the transmissions were removed and replaced at the local shops and then sent to, say, Kansas City, middle of the country kind of a deal for the rebuilding to be done and then sent out, because it's such
I
a
think
highly
we should
skilled
mention
job rebuilding
the two men you're about to meet eventually moved on to a place called Competition Transmissions in Linwood, Illinois. They're both racing enthusiasts, and while Competition Transmissions does regular automatic transmission work, they specialize in racing and beefed up competition heavy-duty transmissions. I don't know what it is with guys who know Bill, but you just can't get them away from the racing stuff.
First of all, you are.
My name is Ray Vinicky. I'm the manager.
And you are.
Craig Gibbs, head builder.
That's right. You're the master technician at actually doing the automatic transmission work.
Yes.
Now, I would presume, though, that you don't really spend any time installing and removing transmissions. I would assume you strictly rebuild the transmissions.
Yes.
Right, which is, I'm kind of surprised that there's that much in a small local area, that there'd be that much rebuilding where one guy could just be devoted to that, but apparently it's true. Now, do you understand what I've said so far about the frustration of dealing with automatic transmissions?
Oh, yeah, I understand it. We deal with it every day. So as a consumer, as individuals, there's scare factor. They know they're expensive. But what I would like to do with the show also is to educate people on how to maintain them and what to do's and what to don'ts. We don't want everybody in the world to have transmission failure. There's enough of them that happen anyway, okay?
Right, enough people pulling boats that are too heavy for their vehicles like I do.
Exactly, okay? And so care and maintenance is a big, big factor. And then also they are complicated, and people need to realize how complicated they are so they understand this is why they cost so much.
No question about it. Now, we're going to get into that, but first I want to talk just for a little bit about, before we get to the automatic transmission, a little bit about what it actually does. And I've got easel Chuck, I hope you can see that behind me there. Tell me if you can. Yes? Okay. If you have the engine, let's call this the engine, and coming out of the engine, or going through the engine, we've got the crankshaft, and coming out of the back here is a little hub on the crankshaft, and so this crankshaft is going to turn, and it has to turn something. Well, ultimately it wants to turn the rear wheels. Somehow we've got to get to that. First thing we need to do is, because of the characteristics of an internal combustion engine, is the engine has to be able to keep running with the vehicle stopped. Means we have to have some way, since the crankshaft is going to be turning all the time, we have to have some way to disconnected to the rear wheels. On a manual transmission car, and we've been through all this before, manual transmission car, we put a flywheel in here, and we put a pressure plate on it, and we put a clutch disc in between. And when the driver pushes his foot down, it releases pressure on the clutch disc and lets the engine sit there turning and the rest of the driveline not turning. When he lets go of the clutch, it squeezes that disc in there, so it must turn with the engine. That's what gets the vehicle underway. After the clutch, in the case of a manual transmission, there's a transmission back here. And, of course, because of the characteristics of internal combustion engines, they don't make a lot of power at idle, so you have to somehow get the RPM up a little bit at lower speeds, and after you get up a little bit of speed with the vehicle, you have to shift up. So there are gears that are manually shifted from one gear to the other to change the ratios as the car continues to pick up speed, finally turning the rear wheel. So the question on automatic transmission is, obviously, all of this is done for you. First thing on the automatic transmission, and we're going to get to the rest of this, but the first thing is part that's not really part of the automatic transmission, even though we kind of assume that it is. We don't have a clutch in here, we've got a torque converter. So same thing here, just, straight down, this will be replacing this. We've got a torque converter, and what the torque converter allows the engine to do, it allows the crankshaft to turn without the vehicle turning. Although, as you know, if you've driven an automatic transmission car, when you put it in gear, you got to hold the brake because there is a little bit of drag there. And the very early torque converters, and they weren't torque converters, they were fluid couplings, they were literally like, and I'm going to draw that down here, it was a little bit like an airplane propeller with another airplane propeller real close to it, and this one drove the transmission shaft. So this one was on the engine, and what this one would spin, if you put a lot of heavy goo oil around this, it would tend to pick this one up and spin with it. This was called a fluid coupling. That's how it was done in the earlier days. Now, wait a minute, I'm getting a signal from my cameraman, so we've got to stop from... Can't see it because of the post. Can we slide this over just a little bit? Thank you, Chuck. That works? Okay. So what we've got here is we've got this one is be the driving or the driver propeller, and this would be the driven propeller that would pitch up speed. Problem with this is not very efficient. Number one, you don't get torque multiplication in here, and number two, it never really locks up. You never really get one-to-one where these things are turning together, so you're wasting fuel and all that sort of thing. Over the years, something was developed called a torque converter, and in my opinion, pioneered by Chrysler Corporation, even though everybody uses it now. And this is a little bit more complicated, and we're going to talk about that because we've got one here today. Ray, I do this because I talk fast, but how am I doing? Help me if I need help.
You're doing fine.
Okay.
What
Principles
are all there.
What have we got in front of us?
This is a torque converter, okay? These are sealed units, even though this one's cut away for us, so we can open it up and see what's inside of it today.
And let's also say that most automatic transmission shops don't do the torque converter part.
Exactly, okay.
That also is a separate specialty field because it's complicated and special tools and all that.
Special tools, special equipment, and everything you need to rebuild one of these. So this is one of the few things that we have to send out to somebody else to take care of.
Absolutely, which is quite common. That's the way it's typically done.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Okay, go ahead and open it up and let's have a look.
Okay, first thing, what a torque converter does is it converts the power from the engine to the transmission, and the same fluid does circulate throughout both of the units. Now, this is the cover, this is the outside unit itself, which is part of the actual workings of the torque converter. But as we open it up here, okay, you'll see in a torque converter, it's a turbine, okay? Like you have propeller blades in the early ones, these are fluid couplings also, but what they are is they work on the same principle, but they're just made better, put it honestly, okay? And what happens is this connects to, want to do that again? This connects to the actual engine, to the flex plate or the flywheel, okay, and it turns with the engine, all right? Through that, as it's turning, this is full of fluid, all right? And these vanes create the actual rotation and build pressure.
Through centrifugal force.
Through centrifugal force. And what it does is the fluid will be sent into this other section of it, which is the cover, okay? So this is the turbine, this is a cover, and as you can see here, it also has the vents and everything in there, all right? And this is what's called a stator. All right. So what happens is when this is turning, it's sending the fluid in one direction, but it ends up being the wrong direction where we need it to go. So through this stator, we'll redirect the actual direction of the fluid, the way it's going, to meet with the cover. All right, and that creates your torque through the momentum of through the stator and the centrifugal force. Now, as the vehicle picks up speed, okay, this system actually stops doing what it's doing because centrifugal force gets so great it just pushes the fluid to the outside, okay? And then it works through the input shaft of the transmission as a direct connection to the transmission because, like you said, all right, the engine at a low idle or low RPM doesn't make a lot of power. So we need this to help that along, to have power to take off.
And if I may add, the difference between the torque converters and the fluid couplings, quite frankly, was this thing that we're passing over, quite frankly, because turbine, it would take a dozen shows to explain all this. Right. But what this actually does is it does create torque multiplication. As the speed gets higher and higher and the centrifugal force forces the fluid more and more to the outside of it, it gets more and more to the one-to-one ratio. Exactly. So this was a significant advancement in automatic transmissions when it came up with the torque converter instead of the fluid coupling. And the final part of the advancement on these things was what you just talked about was the lockup at high speed.
Right, and the lockup is a clutch, which this converter doesn't have one, but there is actually a clutch, like in a manual transmission, similar principle, but it's down in the bottom here, which they don't show it on this one here, and that clutch works as follow. What happens is when you reach your desired speed, say you're getting on the expressway and you're doing 55 miles an hour, and when you back off the gas, all right, this almost acts like another gear in the transmission. You got 4-speed automatic overdrives, and this almost makes it like a 5-speed. And what it does is this clutch engages through the fluid pressure inside the transmission. It realizes through the sensors, whether it's through a TV cable or a TPS switch on the engine, it realizes you back off the gas and it gives you another gear, which is a direct drive. It's 1-to-1. So it's turning as fast as the engine's turning, which in turn, this is one of the things they came up with because of the gas shortage and things the government required the manufacturers to make more fuel efficient cars. And this is one of the ways they did it.
Okay, so again, I don't want to spend a lot of time in this. I want you to have an idea of this because it points up a problem, and then we get to him because we're going to go into what the automatic transmission does, because this is wonderful for getting the vehicle underway, and it's very sophisticated about the way it multiplies the torque as it goes up through. It's like having a 14-speed transmission, except it is all fluid. All of that is fine, and the breakaway speed of automatic transmissions coming off the line is incredible. All of that's fine. But there's one thing that these things don't do. Chuck, come back over here now. There's one thing that they don't do. In a manual transmission car, when you go to shift from one gear to another, you have to relieve the pressure that the engine is putting on the input shaft. So you stick your foot down on the clutch and you shift the gear so that the gears can be shifted without breaking them, then let the clutch out and continue on again. Well, guess what? The torque converter doesn't have any way of doing that. As we've just explained, as the speed comes up, this thing actually will get itself into a locked up position. It doesn't have any way of relieving pressure off the driveline in order so that the transmission can shift. And that means, and you guys have to tell me if I'm doing it all right, that means that somehow the transmission has to be full of clutches.
Correct.
So we've got clutches inside the automatic transmission.
Yes, we do. All complete set and series of clutches.
Yes, a number of sets of clutches. As a matter of fact, each gear has its own clutch.
Yes.
All right, and that's what we're going to explain today. It's going to get complicated here in a moment. If you thought this was something, you haven't seen anything yet, folks, so don't go away. We're going to move things around here a little bit, because as I understand it, you guys tell me that you can completely disassemble an automatic transmission in about 20 minutes.
Yeah, some you can, yeah. Rear-wheel drives.
Rear-wheel drives only. Okay. Yeah. Do we want to complicate it? That was when you do the front-wheel drives, you end up with a differential in the gear case. It gets really complicated. You do those too?
Oh yeah.
Oh boy, that really. Well, we're going to try to keep it simple here today. The automatic. Remember, when you look at the front of the trans, if you see this big area here, this really has nothing to do with the automatic transmission. This is the housing for the torque converter. And once the torque converter gets done doing its job and sends it into that input shaft inside the automatic transmission, that's when all of this stuff, Chuck, come over here, that's when all of this stuff takes over, and I hope what we're going to find out about today is how all this stuff works.
Yikes, I'm lost already. Hi, I'm Janine Lauschat.
And I'm Patty Borwitz, thinking I'm following it so far. The power comes from the engine and goes through the torque converter,
Whose primary function seems to be to interrupt the power going to the transmission.
Yes, and somehow provides torque multiplication at low speed.
Considering all the trouble I had learning how to use a clutch, I was surprised to learn that automatic transmissions have many clutches inside them.
I didn't know that either. Let's take a look at the automatic transmission.
Well, here it is. As I understand it, this is what kind of a trans, Ray?
This is a 700 series transmission.
700 series transmission, I assume General Motors?
Yes.
Okay, and now they tell me they can do this in 20 minutes. I'm going to have you go ahead, and I'll try to reach over and get as much information from you as to what you're doing. What do you start with?
Disassembling it.
Yep, what do you start with?
I'll take the governor cover off, pull the governor out, extension housing.
Go right ahead as you're talking. Let me see what this involves. Ray, don't forget to help me here. What's he doing?
Okay, he's pulling the cover off. The governor is actually in the case of the transmission, and this is the cover. Remove the cover, and then the governor can slide right out. It works on a gear.
Looks like a mechanical device.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
It's got a valve in there. It spins around when you're driving, and centrifugal force pulley is weights open and move the valve for shifting.
Okay, keep right on going. What's next?
Well, the next he's going to remove this tail shaft. This just the actual back part of the transmission case. It's hold on by 4 bolts. There's a speedometer gear, and there's also a speedometer housing, which sends a signal through a gear, or the later model ones have electronic components in there, but it basically sends a signal to the computer and the dashboard for your speed reading.
I found it particularly interesting. You've got a couple of fellows here that do rebuilding, and apparently one is right-handed and one is left-handed, and the benches are laid out according to them being left-handed and right-handed.
Well, basically that's where they're more comfortable at, where they can work easier, because they have their own way of doing things. So,
about how many transmissions would he do, say, in a week?
Average is around 5 major. Okay, now we do a lot of other services here that pertain to the transmission. Not every car that comes in needs to be rebuilt, but the average is usually around 5 major units a week.
Okay, and we're going to talk about it a little bit later in the program. Now, what have you done now?
I removed the extension housing on it, and now I'm going to, well, this one will come in with a mount on it, take the mount off, take the transmission pan off, and you'll see the valve body and everything underneath there.
Apparently, this is not a job for mothers that are worried about their youngsters getting their hands dirty?
That's correct. You get mighty dirty, mighty greasy, and the transmission fluid is also pretty nasty.
Okay, and a little later in the program, we're going to talk about something that I've just learned down here today about changing transmission fluid that actually is very important for you to know, so stick around for that. How many pan bolts are there?
Oh, God. How many are there? 13?
I knew he'd know that.
Yeah, he would. He has to take them out all the time.
Now, see, I would have guessed that you would have started in the front.
No, there's things you have to take off in the valve body area in order to remove the pump assembly, which is right there in the front of the transmission. We'll show you that in 1 second.
Okay, again, folks, I want to remind you that this is where the torque converter resides, and this is the input shaft into the transmission that ultimately the torque converter turns. Go ahead, don't let me slow you down.
Okay, he's removing the pan or the sump, and as you see...
Oh, wow, it's full.
Yeah, it's full of garbage.
Okay, you go ahead and continue what you're doing. I want to explain that for a moment, though. I really never have bothered, maybe that's why I'm sitting with a broken transmission, but I've never really bothered with changing the fluids and transmissions, and the main reason is because every time you change the fluid, you can only get about 20% of it out. I understand things have changed, and Chuck, I don't want you to take, just for a moment, go over there to that machine and then come right back over here, Chuck, just for a moment, but I don't want to miss any of this. As I understand it now, they now have a machine that when you change transmission fluid, you can change 20 quarts or whatever, all of it.
Exactly. This machine over here, that's our power purge unit. But basically what it is, it's a pump that's set up where it removes all the old fluid out of your transmission. At the same time, it's replacing it with new fluid. So you can totally remove all the fluid, which is a total service that you couldn't do before because all you could do was take the pan off, and you got about 3 to 4 quarts out.
And how many quarts are in the system?
It depends on the type of transmission, but they'll average around 9 to up to 15 quarts.
Right, so you're getting, at best, half of the fluid out the old way that I'm used to doing it. You're getting half of it, probably more like you're only getting 25% out.
Yeah, usually, realistically, about 25 at the best, half.
So that, to me, strikes me as sort of a fruitless effort. That's why I've never bothered with it. But how new is the technology there where they actually, I'm going to say it, I'm sure it's going to make you cringe, how new is the technology where they suck the old stuff out and squirt the new stuff in?
Well, this technology here for the transmissions is probably maybe a couple years.
Okay, so that is fairly new then.
Mm-hmm,
So my concern about not bothering changing it is probably not that ill-founded from, I am 60, so from the old days, you know what I mean? It just doesn't seem, it seems kind of pointless to change fluid if you can only get 25% of it out.
Well, yeah, in a sense it was. It was the only option you have to try to keep the fluid try to keep it clean, and not only fluid will break down due to heat, pressure, and age. So by adding some fluid, new fluid to the transmission and replacing the filter in it did help. Okay?
Most common reason the transes go bad?
Fluid breakdown, overheat. People have leaks and do not correct that leak. They can say, well, I'll just add fluid, and they forget, and they run it low on fluid, and it will do damage to the transmission.
Okay, in a moment we're going to explain what that is, and again, I want Chuck to take his camera shot off of this because this is fascinating. What we want to make sure that the public understands, we talked about there being a bunch of clutches in an automatic transmission, and there truly are a bunch of clutches, but these clutches are squeezed together by fluid pressure.
Correct.
And if you lose fluid pressure because of low fluid levels or contaminated fluids, if you lose fluid pressure, then the clutches can slip.
Exactly. They'll slip and they will do damage to the clutches, and the damage is irreversible because once it starts, then even if the fluid has been replaced and it's full, it's a deterioration there that will continue.
Okay, let me find out where he's at now. What have you done now?
I removed some other parts. I'm getting ready to pull the valve body right now.
Okay, valve body coming off next. This is where everybody else, I think, kind of stops because already, by the way, I would not have done this. So,
yeah, not here. This is your valve body. At some point in time, fluid gets through all these worm tracks here and get directed to forward clutch, reverse, or what have you.
All right, you keep going. Well, let me just explain what he's saying is these are all passages for this fluid that we've been talking about, the transmission fluid. These are all passages, and depending on what you tell the transmission to do or what the sensors tell the transmission to do, it routes fluid to various clutches, and we're going to be seeing those clutches in a moment because the clutches, just because it's an automatic transmission doesn't mean it doesn't have clutches. It's loaded with clutches, and because you're not putting your foot down and operating the clutch doesn't mean something isn't operating the clutch, and all of those passages are what's operating the various clutches in the automatic.
Exactly. The valve body, which you just showed you, is like the brains. It's the brains of the transmission. It's the one that gives direction. It's the component that tells the other things inside the transmission what to do. And then, of course, there are things that have to tell the valve body what to do, which on earlier vehicles is throttle pressure or modulators. And then on the later model ones, it's done by a computer and electronics.
Right, and I would think that eventually what we're going to get to is specialists that just deal with the electronic portions of it, the management systems of the transmission, I'm guessing.
Yeah, exactly, because it's getting really, really complicated. The newer the car, the more complicated the electronics are on it.
Now, what have you just done?
I removed the front pump.
Okay, so this is actually a pump that pumps fluid. How many pumps are there in the trans?
Normally just one.
Okay, you said front pump, so I thought
They
maybe
call it when you get a leak or something, it's from the front area, so it's a front pump.
that's most likely a leak is from the front pump.
Yeah, some of the early automatics, there was a few out there that actually had rear pumps.
Yes, as a matter of fact, I remember that in the early days of automatic transmissions, it was okay to tow a car, but as time went by, they no longer had a rear pump, and if the drive shaft were turning and the engine wasn't running, it didn't lubricate. Does that make sense? Or?
Yeah, exactly, because the pump was in the back that was the final component inside the transmission. So when you would tow a car, the drive shaft would turn the output shaft of the transmission, which would also turn the pump. You could also push start those cars, which you can't push.
Which you can't do now, and it was because they don't have rear pumps anymore.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. That's cool information. I don't believe how quickly you're doing this. Go ahead.
This is a 2-forward band. This is applied in second gear and fourth gear.
Now this then, in effect, is kind of a clutch.
Oh yes, it's a
It
brake
could
band.
be considered a clutch. Well, clutch in the sense that we're using something that has friction material on it to engage and then to disengage. Am I correct?
Yeah, this thing here has been really over.
That one really looks large.
Yeah. This is your reverse drum.
Go ahead and don't hesitate to jump in with the narration.
As you can see here, this band is very burnt, and you can see the clutch material, okay, which we call clutch material because it's the same thing the clutches
It is clutch material, no question.
the same thing the clutches inside the transmission are made out of, and you can see how you can see here.
And Chuck, just
if
hold it for Chuck
possible,
and tell us if we need to turn it or move it in any way. It's good right there. Go ahead.
that this material is burnt, and it's also the material is peeling off this band. So this band is no good. You can never use it again.
Okay, we're calling it a band.
Right.
But I am correct when I say it is in effect a clutch.
Yes, but it works, same principle. Clutch is applied, this applied, but it also acts as a brake more or less too.
Okay, my point being though is I want the public to understand that there are perishable parts in an automatic transmission.
Yes.
And the clutch, just like a clutch on a manual transmission car, the disc is perishable. Something has to give when you let the, same with these things, when they shift from gear to gear to gear, there is something perishable in between.
Exactly, and this is the material here, and it will deteriorate, it will wear out.
So it's actually kind of amazing how long this stuff lasts.
Oh yeah, for the little bit of material that's on there, it is totally amazing that it will last as long as it does.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'm impressed. I got 200,000 miles in my van. I'm amazed. I didn't realize there was that much friction material, perishable material in the trans.
Oh yeah, there's quite a bit.
So when you start seeing the pieces, because I've dropped my own pan a couple times and changed filters, and you start seeing those little pieces, in all likelihood, those are pieces out of the perishable lining.
Right, in any transmission, there's a normal amount of wear and tear that you will see in the bottom of a transmission pan, which is usually a brassy material, sometimes a light silver material, which is from normal wear and tear. But if you start seeing this material, the clutch material, then you know that the components inside the transmission are starting to break down.
Okay, let me reach over and, what do you want to tell us?
I'm just going to take these reverse frictions and steels out of this drum.
What are we looking at here?
This is a cushion plate when you put it in reverse. Being this is
Now hold in one place or Chuck isn't going to be able to follow you. Go ahead.
being this is wave like this here. It takes so you don't get a banging when you put it in reverse.
Okay, so it softens the blow.
Right.
And this is a clutch pack.
This is a clutch pack.
Okay, I want you to hold up so the audience can see. When we talk about a clutch pack, folks, I wish I should have brought an automatic or a motorcycle transmission or motorcycle clutch here. You have drivers and drivens, and what determines a driver and driven is you see the ones that have the notches on the outside. That is either a driver or a driven, and then the ones with the notches on the inside is the opposite. If that was a driver, then this is a driven. If this was a driver, then that was a driven. Am I making? If I'm not saying it right,
These
help
are
me.
stationary in the drum. That's where they're splined on the outside because the drum is.
And the drum would turn.
The drum is splined inside.
And the
yes.
drum turns?
Yes.
Okay, so those would be drivers. The ones with the notches on the outside would drive the inner one. So when there's hydraulic pressure routed to that particular clutch pack, it squeezes those together and engages that system.
And these are splined to this drum.
Just start rotating.
Yes. And then it turns the drum.
Okay. And by the way, one thing I didn't point out is he keeps grabbing one special tool after another. There's a reason this is going so quickly.
Yes, it is. These guys have to have their own tools and their own equipment because even when you assemble these transmissions, which you'll see later, there are special sizing tools for the sealing rings and everything that you have to have in order to put these things together and put them together properly. You just stick them in there, and if you don't size these components the proper way, they'll never work, and you might have problems right from the get-go that the transmission doesn't work properly or it won't last. And
Okay,
it's just
we're
one thing.
pulling another clutch pack out.
Yeah, this is the 3/4 clutches in the input drum.
Just hold it steady for a minute. Chuck, come in on that so the audience can see. Once again, we've got drivers and drivens.
Correct.
Very much like a motor. Are you familiar with motorcycles and motorcycle clutches?
No.
That is exactly the way a motorcycle clutch works.
It's very similar to what they use in a oval track stock car clutch.
Well,
too.
the new the multi-plate clutches,
Right.
so they have, and the reason they're doing that is for smaller diameter, so they got less rotating inertia and come off
Yes.
the corner quicker, and also stop going into the corner
Exactly, and then they put more plates in there to make up the difference from.
to get surface area.
Exactly.
You do it with more plates rather than the large diameter. Sure.
But they work very similar to this. So,
And apparently you're not a motorcycle guy either.
no.
That's exactly like looking at a motorcycle clutch.
Is it? Okay.
Exactly.
Total in this transmission, and this input drum here, you have 3 sets of clutches. You got your overrun, forward, and 3/4s, which you've already seen. You also have an input sprag, which is this unit here. A sprag turns one way and locks the other. If this sprag was blown up, then the car wouldn't move forward because it's not locking.
Is that a common problem? I would think the problems
yes.
would be more or less perishable items like the.
No, you get hard parts that go bad.
Really? Okay.
A lot of people, kids get out there and they neutral drop it. When you neutral drop it, that puts a big shock on this thing, as you can see here. It's just...
Now, wait a minute. For the older members in our audience, when he says neutral drop it, this is what the youngsters will do at the drag strip. They'll put it in neutral, rev the engine up with the engine revving high, drop it in gear to get a better launch, and that's real hard on the transmissions.
Try to usually a sprag will blow up, though.
The sprag is what does?
Yeah.
Now, you said we've got three clutch packs. Okay, we got
Input drum.
3 clutch packs, but you also have the one band, which in effect is another clutch.
Correct.
So we're talking about 4 separate sets of clutches in this trans.
Correct. It's a
Far,
force.
That's not it.
Oh, that's not it?
No,
Oh,
there's
I'm
more.
sorry. Keep going. Keep going. All right, what are we reaching for now, Ray?
Okay, there is another set of clutches that is going to be very hard to see right now. That are in the back, that are actually in the case of the transmission.
Chuck, I'm going to turn, or can you see it, or do I need to turn a little bit? Okay, let me turn it just a little bit for you here. Can you see it now? Yes. Okay, he's all the way in on it now. That's another set of clutches.
Yes, it is. And Craig will remove those and show you, show them to you in 1 second here. There's a couple other components that he has to
A
remove.
front planet, ring gear. You have a sun shell. This is common to break too, right here, because it's so small a material here.
Right, when he says a sun shell, it's because these are planetary gears, and the planetary gears ride in this shell. But
All this is splined together to the output shaft.
I see a really heavy-duty broken part in there.
You have another sun gear.
By the way, folks, I tell you what, I'm convinced that I'm not taking one of these apart. I am absolutely convinced I am never doing this. Here I thought I'd come down and get some real good ideas for youngsters out there. This looks like something you have to spend quite a few years before you...
Oh yeah, definitely. There's these guys are certified. Craig's a master rebuilder, an AMCO master rebuilder, which are it's hard to find schools that can specialize in things. They give you a general idea of how automotive works, how transmission works, and stuff like this to give you the basics. But to get into the actual doing these and rebuilding all these different types of transmissions, we're going to deal with on an average of probably about 135 different transmissions that could potentially come through my door at any given time.
Craig, do you run into any that stump you?
No.
Really?
Well, yeah, you do get some, but you don't like to admit it.
He'll figure it.
Go ahead, what do we
This
got?
is a center support. It's splined into the case. This is also have a sprag unit. Turns one way and locks the other. These also are good for blowing up when they neutral drop them and race them. Then you have another set of
Another clutch pack.
clutches. This is your low reverse. These are applied when you put it in reverse along with your reverse drum, and the manual low, if you put it manual, these are applied.
Folks, I hope you're getting the idea. These are all clutches. This is exactly like a motorcycle clutch. These are all clutches, so if you thought your automatic transmission car did not have a clutch, you couldn't have been more wrong. As a matter of fact, each gear has a clutch on it. How am I doing?
Yeah, you're doing fine. Everything in there for the vehicle to go first gear, second gear, fourth gear, everything has a clutch that's applied at any given time.
So in effect, the way that, and again, help me if I don't have it right here. In effect, the way the automatic transmission works is every gear is kind of there all the time, and it's a matter of which clutch you push.
Exactly.
And you don't push it, the hydraulic pressure in the transmission pushes it according to a variety of sensors that it deals with.
Exactly. They're all in there. They're all doing their job, but they're called upon to come on. For when you go from first gear on takeoff, there's a clutch pack applied, then it goes off, and the second clutch pack comes on for second gear, and so on. And that's how it actually works.
Okay, which in effect answers the question that I posed earlier when I said, okay, a torque converter does fine, so the engine can be running and the car can be stopped. It disconnects the power from the rear wheels. That's fine. However, once you're up to speed, the torque converter doesn't release the transmission. So how do you shift gears? Well, the way it shifts gears is the transmission has its own clutches in it, and it releases one clutch and applies pressure to another clutch, releases one clutch, applies pressure to another, and that's the way it goes from gears to gears. So in effect, it's still got a clutch.
Yeah, exactly.
So, okay, Craig, you wanted to add. I see the look on your face.
Oh, no, I was just saying you have a rear planet, you have a front planet, you know, just everything that got to work together.
Right, so the actual gears now, we've talked about the clutches extensively because I think that's a surprise to most people that automatic transmissions have clutches. I think that's a surprise to most people. Where are the gears?
Well, you know, you have a sun gear, you have input sun gear.
There's still gear reduction, but it's not what we're used to seeing in a manual transmission where it's one spur gear against or straight cut gear against another. This uses a series of planetary gears.
Correct. Yes.
Ray, what do you think?
That pretty much covers it. The planets get your gear ratios, otherwise you would have one speed all the time. We don't need that. And throughout the years, when transmissions first came out, the automatics, they were 2 speeds. Okay, they started
the original Ford-O-Matic and the original Power Glide.
Right, they were 2 speeds, and then they went to 3 speeds into 60. Okay, so you had actually 2 shifts, 3 gear ranges, and then going back to the factor with the fuel shortage and everything, they required that the manufacturer develops vehicles that are more fuel efficient, and this is another part of the transmission. They can only do so much with an engine, okay? So they had to do some with the transmission. Now we have 4 speeds, and even 5 speeds are coming out.
BMW has just introduced a 7-speed automatic.
Yes, yes.
And what that has to do with is we're designing engines for higher and higher RPM capability with double overhead cams and 4 valves per cylinder, and in order for them to make power, they've got to run up 7,000 and 8,000 RPM, and they don't have a very wide power band, so you've got to have more steps in between to take advantage of the engine's capability.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
All right, now
get more technology every day.
I got a personal question for you.
Okay.
I shouldn't do this to the boss. This guy is good. This guy really knows his stuff. I mean, I watched him work. He is really good. Can you do it?
Can I do it? One of these? Yeah, I could probably, whether it'll work or not, I don't know, but I could put it together. I did some early units, 350s and 400s, but this stuff here, I wouldn't even want to attempt it.
Okay, so he admits it on camera, folks. I didn't think I could get the boss to admit it. We're going to move some stuff around because I think we're going to reassemble a transmission.
Okay, now I'm saying yikes. I'm lost.
Me too, and they don't have to go any further for me. I would never tackle an automatic transmission.
If I've learned anything, it's I'm definitely not going to take one apart.
Now, Bill mentioned reassembly, but before they can do that, they have to replace the perishable parts.
What we have in front of us is a master rebuilding kit for the automatic transmission, which essentially means all of the perishable parts. And I must admit, I'm a little bit surprised by how many perishable parts there are in an automatic transmission and how long they last. When I came here, I must tell you, I was pushed out of shape that I lost the trans on my Ford van. 200,000 miles on it or not, I think they kind of ought to last forever. Now that I've seen the pieces come apart, I'm surprised they last as long as they do. And you were just pointing something out, Ray, when we were off camera about what you call the lip seals, and I want the audience to see that. So if you would, hold it up and explain what you explained to me.
Okay.
Now you have to hold this for Chuck and not in front of my blue jacket because it won't, or my black jacket, it won't show like that. Chuck,
too much on me.
Does that work? That
Okay.
works? Go ahead.
This is 2 lip seals. One's a new one, one's an old one. And lip seals seal off the proper working pressures inside the transmission, which apply the clutch drums to the clutch packs and so on. And as you see here with a new one, and they're very pliable, there is a lip on it, but due to heat, pressure, and age, these can get worn and damaged and hard and brittle. Meaning this is a lip seal that was removed from that transmission that Craig tore down earlier.
Now hold it. Wait, Chuck, get it out tight. You got it. Go ahead.
Got it. Okay, and this is what happens to them. They snap and they break.
Real brittle and real. I can see that they probably wouldn't seal that well either.
No, not hardly. And this is one of the reasons why we get what we call morning sickness in a transmission, where it doesn't work properly in the beginning stages in the morning, and as it heats up, then it will start to perform somewhat normally because it'll soften these up. But once they're like this, they're no good. And that's why when you have a transmission that has over 200,000 on it like yours, this is why they can go bad.
Okay, I'm taking a lot of abuse for that, but I really do. Now that I must tell you, now that I've seen all these parts, Chuck, take a look at the number of, does this make sense in the camera shot? Can you see it through the plastic? There look like there are dozens of lip seals in there.
Oh, there's many, many lip seals and sealing rings and O-rings inside a transmission because it's a hydraulic unit, and a hydraulic unit has to have pressure, and it has to be something to seal off that pressure, which is all the lip seals.
And if those lip seals are leaking from age and hardness, you're going to have less pressure holding the clutch packs together, which could cause the clutches to slip.
That's correct, and once they start slipping, then they get further damage.
Irreparable damage. It cannot be. It can only be repaired by taking it apart. It won't fix itself.
Exactly. It doesn't get any better. It only gets worse until the point where the vehicle is unusable because the transmission won't work at all.
One of the other guys out here was telling me, Craig, that another thing you never want to do is you never want to put like stop leak in a transmission because that will take and swell the seals. Help us.
Yeah, stop leak will just swell up seals, just like brake fluid. You got certain seals in there that, well, if you was to take one of these lip seals and put stop leak in it, it would just swell it up, and it just prolongs the death of the
transmission. It may help for a few weeks, but ultimately it hurts it.
Correct.
Okay, so bad idea, the additives in that for transmission?
Yeah, there's
so
no...
what it needs is good, clean, fresh fluid all the time.
Exactly, but not so much additives as stop leaks, okay? Because, like he says, it swells up the seals, but unfortunately there's nothing there to tell it stop swelling it up.
Okay, and also I would assume if it swells it up, it's got to put additional wear on it because it's going between a couple of parts that is a tight fit.
Yeah, exactly. We've had transmissions apart that had stop leak added to them, all right? And what happens to them is these rubber lip seals, like this one I showed you, how hard it is, they just kind of just like mush. They just fall apart.
Okay, so it's quite obvious to you that that's a bad thing to put in a trans.
Oh yeah, we can tell when we open up a transmission where if it has been added or not.
Boy, I'm really surprised at that. All right, now what we're going to do here, what Craig is going to do, and I must tell you, I am really impressed with this guy. This guy really knows his stuff. And he is going to put a trans together, but he's all worried about this because he says, well, now, wait a minute, my press is over there, and this is over here. He says, the camera's there. He said, we're not going to. So Ray says to him, well, just go ahead and just assemble the pieces so people can see what the pieces look like in assembly. And then you say, well, wait a minute, I got to press in the bushings and everything. And then Ray says, no, don't worry about pressing. Folks, this is for television. This is theater. How am I doing? I'm doing okay? He is not going to assemble. I want you to see how the pieces go together. Typically, it takes how many hours to put one together properly?
Probably 3 to 4 hours.
3 to 4 hours to do it properly, and so we're not going to take 3 to 4 hours to do it, but I want you to see the relationship of it, because I think by now you've probably already seen yourself. You're not going to be rebuilding any. I'm not, now that I've seen it, I can see why I haven't gone near it in all these years, and all my friends that are just incredibly good mechanics don't go near it either. This is something that we just have to understand about the automobile. It has become so complicated that you are going to have people that just do electronic engine management systems and just do brake systems and just do engines and just do transmissions, and for that matter, just do torque converters, because it's so complicated, requires so many special tools that it's a little bit like if you went to your doctor. You don't go to your general practitioner, as wonderful as he may be, and have brain surgery done.
That's correct. Not only is it especially marketed for that reason, but it's also because of technology and understanding the units. You just can't understand everything that's going on in these new vehicles.
You can only know so many things.
Exactly, and you just couldn't keep up with it all.
Right, exactly, and the things changing all the time and all that. In any event, now, have I properly given you the way out here so people aren't looking at it? Because he was concerned. People, no, if I don't do it this way, no. This is theater. So you're going to be able to put this together just for the TV?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so this is just for the TV camera, because I want you to get a little idea of what it takes to put it together, and then we're going to come back and do some final close-up stuff.
Okay, are you ready?
Let's watch Craig work. Wow, I'm impressed.
Me too. Bill loves the digital editing capabilities he has now.
The actual time it took Craig to do that cosmetic reassembly was 27 minutes.
We had to speed things up because we're running out of time and we have to finish.
Well, there it is, folks. The result of Craig's work. And Craig, I got to tell you, I am impressed. How long have you been doing this?
I've been with AMCO for about 26 years.
And how many transmissions do you suppose you've done in that time?
Oh gosh, probably 1,000.
Well, it shows. You certainly do know what you're doing. A couple of quick things. When we were off camera, Chuck had the question about, he says, you were talking about the pressure on the clutches and the clutch plates and all of that. Mm-hmm. And he says, I don't see a single piston. And apparently you can pull a piston and show us.
Sure.
Please go right ahead and do that, and we'll talk to Ray a little bit more. Chuck, you can go ahead and stay right on him there so the audience can see how this is done. What haven't we covered?
Basically, the only thing we haven't really covered is care and maintenance.
Care and maintenance, and you already mentioned about the importance of changing the fluid, which is something, by the way, that is quite new to me, and I'm going to show you that machine once more as soon as we get a look here. Bring it right on over here, Craig. What are we looking at?
This is a reverse piston.
Okay, you have to hold it still for a minute so Chuck can come in and get it focused. Chuck, have you got it? He's got it. Go ahead.
This is a reverse piston here. It got your lip seals here.
And by the way, we can see that these lip seals, I can see by the way they don't spring back.
Additive. See that? How it just, that's what.
Do it so Chuck can see it.
That's
Hold
what
Chuck
additive
right there.
does.
Can you see it?
It just swells up.
It doesn't snap back.
Right.
So that's part of the deterioration with age and all the rest of it.
Right, but when an additive is put into a system like that, it swells that up and they get real mushy. Just the opposite of the hard one that we showed you earlier. But the problem is when you put an additive on, it swells up the seals, but it doesn't know when to quit doing that. And that's when you get lip seals like that, which will also cause a failure too.
Okay, we were talking a little bit about this changing transmission fluid, which has not been part of my life, although it's going to be now, has not really been part of my life because all the years that I was growing up, frankly, when you change transmission fluid, you only change about 20-25% of it. It seemed kind of pointless to me. With this machine that we pointed out earlier, this machine actually sucks. And the reason, by the way, you can only drain a little bit of it is because a ton of fluid, Chuck, is in the torque converter. You don't have any way there's nothing on the bottom here to unscrew and drain the torque converter. So a ton of the fluid is in there. A ton of the fluid is inside the trans. So all you're getting out is what's in the pan. And that seemed kind of pointless to me. This thing goes inside and sucks all the fluid out of everything, out of the torque converter, out of the trans and all that, and truly gets all the pieces out. As a matter of fact, Paul Bushman, come on over here. Paul Bushman just dropped in, and he had please, Ray, step back in. And he just had an interesting experience that I wanted to relate on camera to emphasize the point again about changing the fluid. Once again, Paul Bushman, my friend from ABC Auto Parts, who's quite responsible for us being hooked up here today. And these guys do know their stuff.
I would never send you to anybody that I thought was less than the tops in their field.
Well, these guys are great. And you just mentioned about the Dodge Durango. You've got that it actually has a light come on the dashboard now that if you don't change the transmission fluid, it warns you?
Well, the part of the 25,000-mile service is you have to service the trans, air cleaner, change the spark plugs, and it throws a service engine soon light at 25,000 miles so that you either have to take it back to the dealer or read the owner's manual.
Okay, well, that's all new. They didn't really have that kind of stuff years ago. And apparently, according to Ray, if you would step back in here again, Ray, don't run away. Apparently, it's because of all the aluminum parts in the transmissions now and the fact that you do get pieces floating around in there?
Yeah, exactly. There is more aluminum parts in these transmissions today than there ever was. When the original transmissions were produced, they were cast iron. Very, very durable, very, very strong. But now, for gas mileage and the way they're making the vehicles, everything has to be lightened. And they do that through aluminum. And you get other parts inside the transmission are still steel, like bushings and things of this nature, and there's a certain amount of wear, which you have to clean that out because these parts circulate throughout the transmission and they can cause damage if it's not done. And so servicing the transmission is extremely important.
All right, and now that they have a device where you can actually suck all the fluid and all the garbage out every time you do it, to me it makes a lot more sense. And one more thing that I want to mention here too, I am not surprised, now that I know the story a little bit better, as to why these guys are so good at this. Because these are race guys. Apparently we've had you on the show before.
Oh, yes. You had me on the show from Raceway Park probably about 7-8 years ago now.
You were one of the officials?
One of the officials.
And on top of that, you also served as crew chief on John Brolick's car?
John Brolick and Pat Kelly.
So once again, I am not surprised that some of our racers end up being the tops in their fields, right?
No question.
Yeah, because they care about this stuff and they're enthusiastic and all the rest of it. That's why I've always said if you want to find somebody to work in your car someplace, pick the gas station that's got the stock car sitting on a trailer, it means they're there because they want to be there and they love the stuff and they don't have to be dragged into it kicking and screaming, right?
No, and they're also technical guys.
Right, absolutely. Okay, you know, the one thing we haven't done that I want to do, and we're almost out of time on the program, so this, instead of being the close, this is going to be the almost close. We wanted to show an automatic transmission or a front drive car and the additional complexity there. You say you've got one you can put up on the counter?
Yeah, we have.
Okay, we're not going to take it apart and do it. We just want to show it.
Show it.
Show
Okay.
it.
No
Okay,
problem.
we're going to show it. So don't go away, folks, because if you think this was hard, I got to show you one, and they're even harder now.
Even more complicated?
You've got to be kidding.
I just wanted the audience to see this little added bit of complication. What you have over here, of course, is the place. This is the bell housing, the engine bolts to this part of it here. Torque converter in here, going back to the automatic transmission here, coming out the back, the drive shaft, and on to the drive shaft to the rear end. On the front wheel drive cars, it gets technically much more complicated because, yes, you've got the same thing here. You'd have the torque converter in here, the engine bolts to here. Except now we turn the power with a high-vo chain over to this side, so the power comes over here, and then the power goes back in here. This is all the transmission components. All the stuff you just saw being taken apart is all in here, except added complication. It also has a differential in here. So you've got the differential, the automatic transmission in here, all as part of the same unit, and this would be the axle shaft coming out here and the axle shaft coming out here for a transverse mounted front wheel drive car. This significantly adds to the complication, and on top of all that, Ray said also, don't forget, on the front wheel drive cars, in order to get the transmission out of the car, you usually have to drop part of the frame.
Yes, you do. You have to take part of the frame down. The engine has to be supported inside the vehicle through a holding fixture. Otherwise, it would come down and hit the floor. And so you have to do all that just to start to take the transmission out of the vehicle, let alone all the process of rebuilding.
Okay, and pretty soon it's going to get to the point with the electronic engine management systems where there's going to have to, right now you've got a separate guy that does the torque converters, you guys do the automatic transmissions, and I think you're going to end up with a separate guy that just does the electronic controls. I think that's in the future.
I can see that coming because they're getting more and more complicated, and it's getting back to the theory that you just can't do everything.
You can only know so much, you can only have so many tools and all the rest of it. Well, Craig, we talk about guys that know so much. I got to tell you, buddy, thank you so much. It was very informative, and once again, underlined my opinion. I am never going near an automatic transmission. You certainly know what you're doing, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, folks, we're done here today. I hope this makes sense to you, and if it doesn't, we'll come back again and do it again.
Did we find the right guys for this or what? We really have to thank Ray and Craig.
Bill was pleased to learn that Ray and Craig are still working together and still doing automatics, although they do more racing transmissions at Competition Transmissions in Linwood, Illinois. You can't get the racing instincts out of the guys.
Unfortunately, we're out of time with only enough left to acknowledge the fine work of our award-winning production team, including Chuck Itzenthaler, Sue Cassanda, our webmaster Frank Barbalaise, Rena Borwitz, and Tom McGrady. Special thanks to JBTV's Jerry Bryant. Music is created for us by Fireside Recording Studio in Westchester, Illinois, and by independent artists Roger Pauley and Jerry Herbert. Of course, we have to take a moment to thank the stars of this edition of Motorsports Unlimited: Janine Lauschat, Patty Borwitz, and our host, Bill Wildt. Me, I'm Samantha Bentley, overwhelmed by the complexity of the modern automatic transmission. Now I know why it was so difficult for Bill to find the right people to do this show. Once again, Ray and Craig, thank you. And thank you for watching. See you next week.
Let's not forget, May Chin worked on this production too.
This program made possible in part by support from Bridgestone Firestone and your local Bridgestone Firestone tire retailers.
This program made possible in part by support from ABC Auto Parts, located on Ashland Avenue at 138th Street in Blue Island, Illinois.
Motorsports Unlimited is produced by Bill Wildt, president of the Motorsport Advancement Crusade. This program made possible in part by support from Jimmy's Red Hots, located on Grant Avenue and Pulaski Road in Chicago.
This program made possible in part by support from J.C. Whitney & Company, located just off I-80 at the Utica exit in LaSalle, Illinois.
Motorsports Unlimited was created to raise public consciousness, understanding, and appreciation of the motorsport community and their activities. You can contact us by email at msutv.com, or you can write to Motorsport, P.O. Box 66242, Chicago, Illinois, 60666. We enjoy hearing from our audience. Please let us know what you think.
Next week on Motorsports Unlimited, it's the annual Riverside Garage Car Show in Riverside, Illinois. It's our last outdoor summer car show of the season, and it's always outstanding, as these pictures from last year's event clearly show. They always attract a wide variety of vehicles, including an outstanding turnout of post-World War II British sports cars. Join us next week and see what Motorsports Unlimited checked out this year.
So that's it, another edition of Motorsports Unlimited and the lovely ladies of motorsports. And be with us next week because we'll have something real exciting. Bill Wildt's going to have the lovely ladies, and just about anything can happen right here on Motorsports Unlimited. Every week at this time, we bring you the best in motorsports. So be seeing ya. Bye-bye. And keep on rocking.